Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like him. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.
Hey, this is Tyler Jones, and you're listening to The Element Podcast. What's happening, all my woods people? The Whitetail Weatherman here, along with KC. What's going on, dude?
Well, I found the stud to your GoPro, but you have lost your actual GoPro.
You talking about me?
No. Man, it was cold this morning, speaking of Whitetail Weatherman. And
I'll let you do this report.
It's officially, I appreciate that. It's officially not standard deer season where we live, which is a sad, sad thing for us. But there's still a muzzleloader season. I'm going to try my hand at that. I'm going to embrace it if I can ever make my muzzleloader hit something. I'm not going to go I'm not going to go hunting, man, if I can't feel decent about the way that things shoot.
Have you shot it this year?
I've shot it like 15 times.
This year?
Yes.
And it's not hitting like anything.
Well, I'm still like cutting off the lowest common denominator on things. First of all, it's got a Barska scope on it, which is not good.
I mean, yeah, probably.
I'm thinking about taking that off and just open sighting it, but I've kind of got it hitting a little bit. I've also changed powders. I've changed loads. I've changed bullets. I think I've got one that's shooting pretty good now, but I still think I need to take that scope off. So there's that. I might actually go do that after I leave here. Go shoot that thing open sight and just try to hit something. But I forgot my tool. While I'm with you, I'm going to borrow your Allen tool to take the scope off. We're going to do that. Tyler and I might kill another deer. Guess what, guys? Y'all can go kill a deer in the rut right now. Did you know that?
In the rut?
In the rut?
What rut? In the rut? Did you say that?
Oh, if you get that reference, you're a friend of mine. So for real, you can go kill a deer in the rut. And today on the show, we've got Lindsay Thomas Jr., a tenured guest for the Element Podcast, to talk all about that deep south rut, because there are a lot of states that you can travel to right now and still go hunt deer. Deer season's not over for a big majority of our listeners, for sure.
Yeah.
And
dude, I haven't shot a deer since November 21st. So, like, I've hunted a lot since then. I would like to shoot one. You know what I mean? I should. We should go somewhere, man.
We just might.
We just might. You know what's real cool is that we're sitting here in Texas talking about muzzleloader, and it's real cool that it is muzzleloader only, not like cool. Muzzleloader or a lesser weapon.
Yeah, it gives you a good reason to have to go spend another $400. That's what it is.
That's what it is. Like, it's literally legislated that way because some muzzleloader company or whatever association
had a lobbyist
came in and said, "Hey, Texas, we want you to open up this muzzleloader only season. Don't let bow hunters hunt because they'll just keep bow hunting. Instead, make them buy a muzzleloader."
Yeah, exactly. And I know that there is a very small population of individuals that are diehard, like Hawkins muzzleloader shooters. But it's not like I understand that they want to be able to hunt with their weapon, and they should be able to, just like we can hunt with our bows. But it's not like me being in the woods on my private property with my bow and arrow is going to have any effect on their ability to go hunt with their muzzleloader.
No.
I'm okay with there being a muzzleloader season, but it should be muzzleloader or lesser weapon.
Yeah.
You know, let's take the high-powered rifles out of the woods just for a little while, give the deer a break or whatever. But
put the curveball shooters in the woods.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
What's a Hawkins muzzleloader? Is that like a traditional, like a musket or whatever?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But it's like a.
That'd be cool.
If I think I know what I'm talking about, which I don't, a Hawkins muzzleloader is just going to be like what you think of as a muzzleloader. So you're going to have like a wad. You put powder in, then you put a wad, and you put a ball in,
like
and
a
load
flintlock
it.
or whatever.
Well, flintlock's going to actually have
the hammer,
flint with a hammer, and a little bowl of gunpowder to ignite. So a Hawkins would just be taking that system.
Is it a breakover still? No.
It's everything goes through the muzzle, but you just take that flint system away and you put a little percussion cap right there, and that cap sends a spark in.
Gotcha.
And stuff. So I mean, it's kind of what you think of as a traditional muzzleloader.
It shoots a musket though, like a ball.
Yeah, I think you might be able to do conicals out of them. I don't really know, but yeah,
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I would love to do it, but I'm not going to buy one. You had one that you had for some time. Yeah. So, and it just maybe less accurate than your bow. You think?
I feel a lot more confident with my bow than I do the muzzleloader for sure. Which is, I mean, that's a sad thing, man. Like, I don't know. Probably, unless things get better, I'm not going to shoot anything over 20 yards with this thing, which is pretty tough.
Dude, you have to get close.
I know.
It's just bow hunting with a gun, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah. Just a real loud, smoky bow is what it is.
Oh, smoky bow. That's cool. Well, I said this earlier. I hadn't shot a deer since November 21st, but we have hunted a lot and had a lot of encounters. But with all that said, we have now released the Iowa buck film or video, whatever you want to call it, where I killed on public land in Iowa. It's been well received.
That's a preview right there. Go watch it.
It's cool, man. It's cool for sure. People like what they heard in it and what they saw, which makes me feel good because I spent a considerable amount of time just adding in all kinds of different angles with the GoPro and map stuff as well.
Dude, the map stuff is cool.
You like it?
Yes, I like it a lot.
I'm trying to. I got so excited after I shot that I would do these clips. And they were like really short. So I would say something and then cut it off, stop recording real quick. And I'm like, I wish I had recorded some dead space on the end of that so I could just put some map in there on top of it. So the map clips are kind of short at certain times, but definitely have had like several people say that they thought it was good. It helps them to visualize what we were doing and that kind of thing. And I'm trying to listen to people that are watching the YouTube videos. I mean, there was another guy that said, hey, you should put dates on these because it's kind of hard to keep up with sometimes. Even though pretty much everything we're doing is chronological. But he said also, your kids will probably want to watch this one day and, it'll help them to understand what was going on and everything. And I thought, man, that's a good idea. So I started trying to put dates in there on these for the most part. So, yeah, now we're on to Kansas, the next Kansas series. And there are the two biggest deer that we encounter all year, I think, are in this next series. The biggest deer you've ever seen on the hoof is basically going to be the next video released.
Man, oh man.
So it's getting crazy. So keep up with it. Subscribe to YouTube, and that'll help you to see when we release videos and keep better in touch with how our season went. Just now getting around to a lot of that. Unfortunately, I have to go back to editing some wedding videos soon, and I'm like, ooh. When you've been editing hunting stuff, like the last thing you want to do is go do a wedding video,
Yeah.
Just so uninspired.
Would you rather go hang OSB? Because that's what I have to go back to doing.
Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not. I don't know. Some days I'm like, man, it's good weather. It'd be good to work outside instead of in this cave,
Yeah,
But,
I hear you.
But overall, I'm just gonna probably eat and get soft.
Whatever we can.
There.
That's why we're trying to scramble, find ways to go hunt somewhere else right now because we don't want to go back to real world stuff completely. So there's that. But it is what it is. I've been doing a little fishing lately, a little boat riding actually.
Yeah, those are good.
So we're looking. I'm looking forward to fishing season more than I have in a long time right now. Probably because my dad got a boat, so it makes it easier. But
yeah.
I think you might see Tyler and I doing some bass fishing this spring.
For sure. For sure, man. That's what I want to do. I would like to go fishing today or tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull it off, but we've had, like, it's been cold in the mornings, like you said earlier, but we've had some pretty good afternoon weather, man.
Yeah, warming trends.
Very warm. So,
what are you going to do?
What am I going to do as far as fishing goes?
If you wanted to go catch a bass on an afternoon right now, what would you do?
I'm not trying to go catch a bass probably at this time of year. If I'm going out, I'm going to try to catch a big bass. So I'm going to fish differently than if I was trying to catch a bass probably. And that being said, I'm probably flipping a jig near a creek bend somewhere in probably 6 to 15 foot of water. Yeah, somewhere. Just fall on a creek, flipping jig on big, huge stumps. So, and I think fish tend to relay overall on the shady side of the stump, but I know this time of year, if the water's pretty cold, they might get in the sun. So.
Water's pretty stained right now, too.
Yeah, it has been that way for like the whole year, it seems like. It's because we don't have grass anymore. But anyway, yeah, I've been talking about it a lot, man. There's a lot of fishing that's going to happen, I think, this year. I need more fillets, you know. I've only eaten fish a few times in the last year or so, and it's because I don't have a ton of fillets.
I'm going to give you a challenge. You ready?
I love challenges.
The first over you catch this year, you're gonna fillet it.
It'll be hard, but it would be nice to have a big old fillet
It'd
of
be
fish.
so hard.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the last 9-pound bass I killed on purpose.
Was there one ever?
I don't think so.
I don't think ever for me either.
Mm-mm.
I mean, there's never been a fish a bass over 16 inches, you know, because of the slot that I've killed and ate.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Killed some catfish that were that big.
Oh, guarantee you that. Guarantee you that.
I'll take a crappie that's 24 inches, too.
Oh, wow.
Anytime it wants to bite, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I would just not ever eat it. I would just put it in the freezer and look at it every day and just be like, oh, that fillet is awesome.
Do you think about this? Technically, you could go to parts of Florida and go on a rut hunt and a bass spawn fishing trip all at the same time. Can you imagine that?
I can't, man. But if that sounds weird to you, then you're going to like what's coming up.
This is the podcast for you.
That's right. We're going to like what's coming up. We got Lindsay Thomas Jr., and he's going to give us the lowdown. I guess we've talked enough about fishing for our deer hunting audience. So we'll just get to Lindsay then. All right, so now on the phone, we've got Lindsay Thomas Jr. of the QDMA. And when I went to gather the experts on the topic of deep south deer ruts, I thought there would be no better people to inquire with than the QDMA. So I hit LTJ up, and I was like, hey, you know, who are the experts? And he was like, you know, lo and behold, he was like, you're talking to him. So I was like, okay, cool. So thanks for doing this, Lindsay. We really do appreciate it, man. And it's nice to have kind of a kind of person who knows a lot about these things, as opposed to talking to, you know, sometimes you talk to a biologist about stuff like this and you come away having more questions than what you actually had in the beginning. So I think being that you could probably turn this into something that we can understand, and you're a good guy to talk to. Your dad shot a tank of a deer this year, man.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, thanks. He got a good buck on our family land in southeast Georgia on October 26th, which is right in the peak of breeding in coastal Georgia. So I know we'll get into, you know, questions about that, like why is our rut there in late October? But yeah, he did get a nice buck for our area. Probably going to end up being one of the top 10 bucks in the county when we get it officially measured.
Wow.
So, awesome, man.
Yeah.
How is Grace Acres these days?
Everything's doing good.
Good.
You know, happy to have gotten that buck. My brother-in-law killed his first buck ever on the farm this year. He was a small, or sort of a 2.5-year-old 8-pointer, smaller buck. but his first deer ever, and we were, thrilled about that. He was thrilled with that buck. So, it just makes a great story and example for me to talk about that, doing QDM and producing more adult bucks does not mean you can't still shoot some younger deer.
Sure.
And, now and then. And for people that are new to hunting or never killed a buck before, never killed a yearling, never killed a 2.5-year-old, whatever it is, you don't have to have this stringent set of rules. So we had a very good season.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that deer falls right in line with the QDMA kind of suggestion, right? 2.5 and older, isn't that kind of what y'all encourage people to go for?
What we say is, the starting point is try to protect most of your yearlings. So, if you've never killed a 2.5-year-old, that's kind of where you ought to start.
Yeah.
You don't walk into trying to start QDM and say, I'm going to wait till 5.5. If nobody's been protecting yearling bucks in that area, it might take you 4 years to grow a 5.5-year-old. So, you need to take it stair step and start small and work your way up.
Sure. Yeah.
And the thing is, even if you're protecting most of your yearling bucks, your 1.5-year-olds, that's the most vulnerable, innocent, unaware deer out there among bucks. And they're usually the first to go down. So if you're protecting most of them and getting them to 2.5, you're very quickly going to build your numbers of adult bucks. You're not going to come in there and kill all the 2.5-year-olds after that. In other words, more are going to be trickling through to the older ages. So it starts working really quick.
What's the big project you got lined up out there this year?
Well, we got burning season coming up. We always do a little bit of fire every year. Another project I'm going to be jumping on real quick. We've got an outbreak of what's called Japanese climbing fern, and it's a bad invasive plant. It spreads by spores, and these spores it puts out in October, and these things cling to anything, an ATV, your boots, a deer, whatever, a turkey, and get transported that way to other areas. So this is bad stuff, and it just climbs all over everything and kills native forage and vegetation that's beneficial, and gets transported on logging equipment from area to area. Well, we've got it, and we've got to jump on it quick and get that under control. So unfortunately, a lot of times maintaining good deer habitat is getting rid of stuff like that, and that's one of the projects we got coming up.
Sure. That sounds like you got your hands full there for sure. So we're talking the Deep South Rut today, and there's a lot probably to be said about this. So I think we'll jump into it. And with that, just kind of break down general and briefly, what are the factors that determine the rut in most of the country where you would normally see rut action happening?
Well, the bottom line, Tyler, you got to remember is think of deer breeding in terms of species survival. And it really all comes down to what is the best time of year for a fawn to hit the ground. Best for the doe and her having adequate nutrition, because the last month or 2 months of pregnancy for a doe are the most intensive in terms of draining her nutrition. And then she goes into nursing, and so the demands grow. You got, the fawn is using the milk, and then the fawn will be weaning. But you've also, on forage, but you've also got the question of having good cover to protect the fawn and hide it from predators. And so any question for any deer population is, what's the best time of year to put fawns on the ground so that they have a great chance of surviving and thriving? That's what it's all about. So in the north, as you get into colder climates, what happens is it just works out to be November. There's nothing special about November for deer to breed other than the fact that that's the best time, so that 6 months to 7 months later, when fawns are born, that forage and climate and everything else is ideal for the doe and the fawn to have healthy nutrition, to survive predators, but also so that the fawn has enough time to gain enough size before winter comes around again, or else that fawn will not survive the following winter. So that is a crucial timing factor, and that is why most ruts, from the middle United States and north, are a very tight window in November to hit that timing in the spring. And as you move south, that factor becomes less and less important, that climate factor. And when you get down here in the southern states, when you get into Mexico, and when you get into even Central America where there are whitetails, it is less and less important for the fawn to hit the dirt at a certain time, and therefore deer can breed across a wider window. They can breed earlier, or even as you get into Central and South America, they can pretty much breed year-round because they can, because it doesn't matter what time of year the fawn hits the ground. So that's the primary thing that determines historically why whitetails breed when they do in any given region. It is all about fawn survival.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that makes sense. So I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but it kind of brings this to my attention is, like, across wildlife in general, are species that tend to inhabit extreme regions away from the equator that way? Do they have tighter windows for breeding as opposed to those around the equator?
That I don't really know, Tyler. I'm a deer dude.
Hey, I just thought you might know. You're a knowledgeable guy, you know. Yeah. Well, maybe we can get a.
I'm sure there's other examples, but you know, deer have unique requirements as far as needing cover to hide from fawn predators, needing the forage for the fawn to wean on, needing the forage for the doe. You know, she doesn't need to be trying to drop a fawn and nurse it in winter when there's no forage. And that fawn doesn't need to be, you know, walking around with spots in January. It's not going to survive. It's not going to be big enough to survive. So those are unique requirements. Now, the requirements change in some specific locations. Florida is one of these we can get into, and even in the Mississippi River area, you get some of this. But in the Everglades of Florida, deer breed at a different time because spring is a traditional flood season, and you wouldn't want to be dropping fawns in water. So they breed much actually earlier. They're breeding way early, so that fawns are, you know, big enough by the time the spring flood season comes around that they can cope with that. So it's not always just temperature and climate. Things like flooding and other local factors can affect ultimately what's the best time for a fawn to be on the ground.
Sure, yeah. So since we're on Florida, let's talk about it, man. This is one of the most perplexing states out there as far as the deer rut goes. I looked at a map yesterday in preparation for this conversation, and I was blown away. Like, county by county, things vary so much there. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, you probably saw the map that the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission produced here just a year or two ago. Based on some research they did, gathering data from over almost 1,000 does across the state. And the way they did this is the way most other states do it, and the way almost any rut map worth anything was produced. And that is, in the late hunting season when does are harvested, many times they will have a fetus inside them. And you can, you know, that's from that doe having just been recently bred during the rut. And you can take that fetus and measure it with a ruler that will tell you when that fetus was conceived. And if you get enough data, you know, measuring one fetus like that and having one date, that doesn't tell you when the rut was. Because, you know, breeding dates scatter out in kind of a bell curve. You have a peak, but you have some that are early, you have some that are late, and et cetera. So you need a bunch of numbers. So 1,000 does they gathered data on around the state, and that's how they came up with that map. Well, ultimately what you see, if you go to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission website and go to their deer information page and look for the rut map, you'll see everything from February, you know, January and February rut peak in the Panhandle near Alabama, all the way down to July and August in South Florida and in the Everglades, with kind of a weird intergrade across the whole state in between those two extremes. And what they found in that data they collected was pretty amazing when they reported on this. Literally May, the month of May, was the only month of the year they did not find evidence that a doe had been bred.
Goodness.
In July, there's bucks working scrapes and chasing does in South Florida.
Oh,
that's nuts.
You know, and into August, September, and then you get some of the traditional, you know, November in the middle of the state and other pockets, and then it begins to flow late December, January, and into February up into the Panhandle. So, Yeah, I think it literally is the single state in the nation with the broadest range of rut peaks across the calendar.
With that, do they have a broad range of like antler growth dates?
I don't think, that's a good question. I've never seen data on that, although I know that just this past year, a QDMA member sent me a trail camera picture of a buck in south central Florida, just on the northern edge of the Everglades. I think the picture was like July 30th, and he was standing there in hard antler. So clearly, the testosterone cycle is going to work a little differently there. If does are coming into estrus, that, those pheromones are going to be keying those bucks up and triggering them to go into the cycle themselves so they can be prepared to breed. And that's going to also affect the antler growth cycle. So that's a good question. I'm not real sure about that, except that I do know that in the South Florida, it does appear to me that bucks are, shedding velvet and coming into hard antler a little earlier than normal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just, you think like common sense would tell you if, May's the only month that does aren't getting bred, that means that in June there's somebody probably hard-horned out there somewhere, chasing a doe around. Now I understand they have everything it takes all year long to make it happen, but like you were saying, the testosterone levels have to be there to kind of push them into that. So along with that,
that's correct. Now, what the scientists have found is you can make a buck gear up for breeding any time of year, even when he doesn't have antlers, by introducing those pheromones that come from a doe. So if a doe is, it doesn't matter. And again, you got to remember, if May was the only one month there was no breeding, that doesn't mean there's a whole bunch of does being bred in June or April. There were some. So this is like a shotgun pattern where you got, a few shot scattered out on the periphery, and that's what these other times of year are. So in June, when there's, a small handful of does in a certain area coming into estrus, all it takes is one doe coming into estrus and a buck encountering those pheromones for him to be able to gear up and provide her the service she needs. And then, when that goes away, he's, that's not going to trigger him to grow antlers, but he can breed.
So let me ask you this. Whenever they did this survey, from what I understand, yearling does in a very healthy deer population can be ready to breed that fall, right? So if there's enough forage and everything, you can have a 9-month-old doe breeding. Or
a fawn. Not a yearling, but a fawn. Yeah.
Yes. So
6 to 9 month old fawn, if she achieves has adequate nutrition to achieve a certain body size threshold, and it varies by region, because obviously in the north, deer tend to be bigger on average. It's a different weight than it would be, say, in Georgia for a fawn to come into estrus. But if they reach that threshold weight, they'll come into their first estrus, and it tends to be later. That's why many times in areas where, with a typical November rut, many times people will say they witness rut activity in December, mid-December. A lot of times what that is, that late or second rut, is fawns, healthy fawns coming into estrus.
Yes. So whenever they're taking this data on, measuring fetuses on harvested does in Florida, are they taking that in consideration? Are they harvesting only mature does, or is part of that because there are, young of the year does being bred, and so that's what's really pushing out those outliers?
That's a good question. I don't know if they collected age data with the doe harvest. This would have been, because a lot of this was on public land and private land, so it's any legal doe harvest by a hunter that they were able to collect that that breeding data from. So it would have included any fawns that came into estrus. I don't know if they collected age data so that they could look at that. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, cool.
Let me ask you this: one of the more rare and small deer in the U.S. would be the key deer, as far as I understand. What's special about them? What makes them different? And also talk about their rut, if you know anything about it.
Tyler, I don't know what their rut is. I'm going to assume because they're down in that southern tip of Florida where we know it has followed that traditional pattern of the further south you are, the either the wider range your rut is or the earlier it is. I'm going to assume they're, kind of like that Everglades whitetails where they're breeding in summer, breeding in July, August. But I might be wrong. I haven't really zoomed in on the key deer and looked at their rut.
Yeah.
we know they're a subspecies of whitetails. They are whitetails, but they have been isolated geographically long enough out there on those islands that they are a unique subspecies. They have very small body sizes, we know, to adapt to that climate, to adapt to nutritional resources available on those islands.
Right. So, I mean, I mean, when I look at something like this, I can see how we love animals and we like plants, native vegetation, these kind of things, but there's only so much you can know. And so, like for us, we're also, and I know you are as well, a hunter. And so, since you're not really like going to ever probably be able to kill a key deer, you're probably not like tuned into exactly what's going on, but a little bit, and that's kind of how I feel about a lot of this. And I'm glad that you know a lot more than we do and can talk to it.
Well, and let me say this, Tyler, you talked about how, I'm an expert on this. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on this. I'm a journalist. I'm not a biologist. And I've just spent a lot of years talking to the biologists and learning from them, asking them questions about this stuff because it fascinates me, and trying to translate that into, as a deer hunter, translate that into a language that I understand and that is practical for me to apply to my deer hunting and deer management.
Right.
So then as a writer, I share that with others. That's really how I've come to know what I know is getting to know the true experts, the biologists that have done this science.
Yeah, and it makes you a good person to talk to because excluding a passion for fake news, if you're ready to report, real findings as a journalist, you can compile a ton of information and come out with like the median. As opposed to someone who has a personal agenda, maybe, or at least just their own very hard-founded beliefs on what they think. You can take what it takes, and through I guess what do they call it? Something editor's choice or whatever. You can kind of just make it where it's digestible for most people, and exclude or kind of meld together all the
doctoral language.
Yeah, all the crazy stuff that people talk about out there. So,
yeah, I mean that's what QDMA has always done. We're a fact-based organization, a science-based organization, taking the science behind this stuff, and that's reliable information, and supplying it to deer hunters in ways that they can apply and use to learn these animals that we all love.
Yeah. So on that note, this has nothing to do with Southern Rut, but you've used the term subspecies quite a few times. Are you, Lindsay Thomas Jr., a grouper or a divider when it comes to speciation? You like that one, don't you?
I don't know exactly what you're referring to there.
I've seen
Marlins.
What?
That's what you're talking about, right?
What?
We've had the Marlin debate before.
Oh, yeah. So
in the parlance of our times.
Yeah. So I've seen, different articles, maps, whatever, probably not associated with QDMA, I don't know, where there's up to 27 subspecies of whitetails. And I think that's got to be baloney. But you also can't just call them all the one exact same thing, right? So where do you fall in that scale?
I would say that you're never, short of some severe geographic boundary or barrier, you're not ever going to really see a hard line between these groups. It's much more subtle. Just like we know that, you got the Borealis subspecies of the north, and you got the Texas whitetail subspecies, and you got, subspecies over here in the Virginia whitetail where I am. But if you try to find the line between me and you, and where that deer changes from one to the other, you'll never find it because it is so subtle across the miles between me and you, as those deer gradually interchange and are interbreeding with each other, there's no clear dividing line. Now you take the Columbia whitetail. These are deer in the Columbia River Basin of Oregon and Washington State in that area. There's a very clear geographic boundary, the Cascade Mountains, that prevent those deer from interbreeding with the whitetails of eastern Washington State. So it is very clearly a subspecies. The key deer, I think, is very clearly a subspecies. We've got deer on Georgia's coastal islands, the black-beard deer and some others that are sometimes counted as subspecies. But if you picked up a deer off Blackbeard Island on the Georgia coast and took it 2 counties inland to Grace Acres in Wayne County, Georgia, and turned it out, it can breed with those whitetails. So, yeah, it's it really in my opinion, it takes a very hard geographic boundary to truly say, that this is a very unique subspecies. Now, again, you take a big Minnesota borealis whitetail, that's clearly a different animal than a South Georgia whitetail. If you put them next to each other, there's no mistaking them.
Tyler and I like to joke about that. Like, we'll see a 2-year-old in Kansas, and we're like, dude, that deer would whoop every buck we have back home.
Yeah. But the question becomes, between Georgia and Minnesota, where's the line where one changes to the other? You're not going to find it.
Yes.
It's just, those are subtle changes.
Sure. Yeah. So speaking of Georgia, let's move up there a little bit and talk about the deer of Georgia. First of all, I would like to learn a little more about the Blackbeard deer. Can you hunt those? Because I just want to say I've shot a Blackbeard deer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And hey, by the way, that's on Blackbeard Island, which is a national wildlife refuge. And there's no bridge to it. You can bow hunt it. There are refuge hunts. And, yeah, y'all will look into doing that. You can boat over, get over there, camp out in some of the, beautiful, pristine coastal maritime forests and bow hunt those whitetails and kill you a Blackbeard deer. So,
boy, that's cool.
Man, might have to cut this out. Yeah, that's awesome. So it sounds like that's pretty close to where you guys hunt as well. Is that right?
Yeah, but it is. Yep, there on the Georgia coast.
Okay, so you spoke to an late October rut there. What's the reasoning for that?
When you look at going back to what I said about how as you go from north to south, the breeding tends to move earlier, so that in coastal Georgia and Florida, northern Florida, around the Gulf Coast too, you kind of used to see historically a late October, mid-October rut. And again, it's because by the time you get down this deep in the south, spring is coming at a different time than it is in the north. Our spring is earlier, so the deer need to be breeding earlier to put fawns on the dirt to coincide with the prime high-quality forage of spring. So as you get into coastal Georgia and southern Georgia, it's particularly on the coast, it is an October rut. Now, you get out on those islands and it's a little bit earlier. It's more mid-October, and then it just kind of fades inland toward a late October up into early November as you get up into middle Georgia. And, you see remnants of that throughout the Gulf Coast into, I think, even coastal Texas. You guys have a late October rut, if I'm not mistaken.
There is one, and then there's a early one, like September as well, I believe, there in Texas. Yeah. So that's cool. So what's the high quality forage that shows up around your area in the spring?
Well, it's just everything. All of the native plants, and of course non-native ones too, that deer will eat, that are greening up at that time.
Sure.
So it's all of those things. Again, like I said, not only important for the doe, who is in that last month of pregnancy that's so intensive, but then producing milk after that, but also for the fawn to eventually wean off a few weeks later onto forage, being the time of year when all of that is producing new growth, but also it's at highest quality. When you get into late summer, as we all know, a lot of native and natural forages are maturing, are going to seed. They're grassy, they're leafy, they're tough, they're getting older. The quality has dropped. Digestibility is lower, and the nutritional quality is lower. So, time of year on that is critical for all of those forages.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I believe you're riding there with G-Man, and I believe he has spent some time hunting maybe some mountainous country in the last couple of years in Georgia. What is that rut window in different part of Georgia there where he might be hunting?
I believe as you get up into the mountains of Georgia, it's still more of a typical November rut.
Gotcha.
So it's as you get down into southwest Georgia, we get into a little bit of a December rut that is part of the whole Alabama fruit basket that we can talk about. Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana gets into that really kind of big mystery area where it's a whole different ball game of rut timing. But for the most part, Georgia's November and late October on the coast.
All right, well, let's pick some of that fruit. So what is the deal with those, kind of, you might call them the central coastal states? Why is it such a mixed bag, or fruit basket, I guess is what you called it, of rutting dates? Like Alabama, why is it so late like that?
Yeah, well, Alabama's famous for having, and it's got some pockets that are November, but and interestingly, just recently, Alabama rolled out the state agency rolled out a new rut map that you can Google and go to the Alabama, Outdoor Alabama website and find it. Again, based on biological data like we talked about, but and look at that map. It really is just, looks like a piebald deer. It's all over the place, and it's got some November in there, but then you've got a large area that's into December and January and even early February in some pockets down in, I believe it's southwest Alabama, that you get into the January, February stuff. And even recently, a couple of years ago here, the state adjusted their hunting regulations in that area to push the season later into February to allow deer hunters to continue hunting the rut. So, yeah, it's all over the place. Mississippi's the same way. They tend to have later, into January and even some areas February in Mississippi and Louisiana as well. Jason Sumners, who's now the deer project leader in Missouri for the state agency there, he did his graduate work at Mississippi State University, and he looked at this. And I interviewed Jason and did some writing about what he learned. He looked at this very question. Why is the rut like that in those states? And he looked at it at the genetic level with some DNA information. And what he found, what they did is an interesting way he did this study. He went to some areas where on a map, it looked like you had some deer populations very close to each other, in some cases within like 30 miles of each other, with wildly different rut peaks. And he took genetic samples from both populations in several areas around Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana too. I think even over in Texas. And then he compared the genetics of those two sets of deer populations that were close to each other geographically, but far apart in the breeding dates. And what he found was he had to get down to the level of genetic, and genetics is always, it gets confusing for me, but when you start talking about DNA, because it's very complex science. But deer have what's called mitochondrial DNA, and that is passed along only by the doe. That's the important thing to know. There are genetic aspects of deer that are passed only by the doe. And what they found was the genetics of these populations were very similar on the doe side of the equation and very different on the buck side of the equation. In other words, these populations were sharing, the bucks were moving back and sharing genetics, but the does were not. And we know that's how does function. We know that does don't move a lot. They generally live in the range where they were born. Bucks are the opposite. Bucks disperse as yearlings and go to other areas from where they were born. So any genetics that are carried only by the doe are going to tend to move very slowly across the landscape, if at all. And so what they said this suggests is that these breeding dates come from restocking. They come from the days where these states went to other areas, both in the U.S. and even in Mexico, to get deer to restock populations. And apparently the timing trigger for breeding is carried by the doe. So years later, decades later, these populations that came from other areas came with a different trigger for when they should breed, and they have persisted in these areas because of the fact that bucks don't carry them around when they move. So that's how you can end up with a situation like Georgia, where we have a November rut, and then I can load up and drive across the state line from one county to another and hunt a January rut, literally.
Wow, that's cool.
And a lot of Georgia deer hunters do that.
Yeah.
They, hunt Georgia's rut, and then things die off in Georgia and go cold, and the scrapes are empty, and you load up and head to Alabama, buy your non-resident license, and the rut's just kicking off. So that pretty much explains it. It comes from restocking. And, the thing is they really can't trace back and say, well, this February rut comes from deer came from Mexico. Because here's the problem. The trigger is based on day length.
Mm-hmm.
And when you move a deer to a different latitude, the day length that triggers their rut is on a different date in the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Day length varies across the calendar, north to south. The day length here in Georgia is going to be different than it is in Minnesota today or Michigan because of the difference in latitude. So the trigger is now at a different time. So these does are triggered to breed at a different time in the calendar. And the key here is that in the South, that persists because those fawns are not going to be killed by a hard winter. So the genetics stay.
Mm-hmm.
If you in the North, if deer were restocked that triggered on a different, late date in the calendar, those fawns are not going to survive the following winter because they're not going to be born on time. They're not going to be born early enough. And so those genetics are not going to persist.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason that has all stuck around in the South is because the deer can get away with it.
Yeah. So that all makes very good sense to me, and I agree with all of it. And it makes, I can see it happening. But the one thing that I kind of get hung up on is, like you said, estrus cycle is triggered by length of day. Well, if you have does that are being triggered in February, which is, just say, assume 45 days from the winter solstice, why would it not also trigger 45 days pre-winter solstice? You follow me?
No.
Okay, so December 21st, 22nd is the shortest day of the year. So, or around those times, depending on which year. And that's...
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I see what you're saying. That there's another day in the year that's probably a similar day length.
Yes, exactly. So, February 15th, say that a doe's triggered then there probably is a day in early November that also has the same amount of daylight. Why is she not triggered for that November period of daylight as opposed to the February period of daylight?
Get back to me when you find out the answer to that question.
That's a good question.
I'd like to know myself.
All right. Well, I guess we'll find the real expert for that one, Lindsay. Sorry. Just kidding, man.
Is your boy Chuck Sykes still slocking deer with a pellet gun down there in Alabama?
I'm sure he is.
That's one thing that just stuck with me during the convention a couple of years ago, man.
Yep.
So Alabama's kind of built. The maps that I've seen is kind of like almost like a north and south thing. When is that north rut?
I'm trying to picture the map. I just was studying it yesterday because they just released it recently, and I want to say it is kind of a December.
That's what I thought too.
December mixed into kind of January, and then it sort of blends as you move south down into January, February.
Gotcha.
But again, looking at the map, you got little pockets, just like you were saying earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You got little pockets that they're finding where, literally on the county level, where one county might be a little bit earlier and another a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's how, now that we know that this trigger for the timing is carried by the doe, and that those move slowly across the landscape, that's how you can have a little pocket like that on the county level that persists and does not sort of be washed away by genetic flow across the land, because the bucks generally are the cause of genetic flow, and they're not carrying the DNA that's the timing.
Yeah.
So, it's tough to generalize anywhere in any state, particularly like Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, where you get this intergrade of different timings. These maps that the state agencies are producing are extremely useful. If you folks that are listening, if you hunt in Alabama, make sure you find that map on Outdoor Alabama's website. Mm-hmm. Florida FWC has got their map. Georgia, the Wildlife Resources Division in Georgia has produced a rut map for dates in Georgia. I believe Louisiana has one. I'm not sure about these other states, but they probably do as well. So visit your state agency's website and see if they don't have a map to rut timing based on this biological data, because sometimes at a very fine scale, you can plan your hunting and on the calendar and use that information to decide when you're going to go. Like I said, literally, and I've done it before. Years ago, my dad had access to a lease just across the state line in Russell County, Alabama, and we'd hunt the Georgia Rut, and then when that was over after Christmas, load up and go to Russell County, Alabama in January and watch bucks fighting and chasing does again, and it really was pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. So Louisiana kind of is similar to Mississippi, I guess. Is there anything odd about it or different than some of the states we've mentioned?
Not that I recall. It's just kind of like that Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama area where you get this swirl that kind of runs from, a little bit of November, but then December and January mostly across most of the state.
Yeah.
And then, then it flows into Texas where you guys have got a lot of December rut peaks. I think on the Gulf Coast, you've got kind of an October like we talked about, but then big chunks of East Texas and South Texas are December. Is that right?
South Texas especially. Yeah. It's like a mid-December rut. Everybody goes down to the brush country to hunt December 15th, that's kind of what they do here in East Texas. At least where we've hunted in the last several years, we've seen, and this is something I wanted to ask you about and talk to you about. We've seen our trail cameras have the most buck movement in mid to late November, somewhere around the 14th to the 23rd, 24th, something like that. Now, if somebody was doing their own research via trail cameras and that kind of thing and trying to hone in on the heart of the rut, that seems like those would be good days to be in the woods because there's just tons of buck movement. But does that mean that is when the does are getting bred, or the most does are getting bred, or when, can you assume that would be happening according to trail cameras?
Yeah, what I would say about that is, and I can't promise you that you can make that correlation where you are in Texas, but I know that here in Georgia, the University of Georgia, a student named Michael Biggerstaff, this has been a year or two ago, was doing a big trail camera study. This was part of a bigger University of Georgia study looking at trail camera survey methods without using bait. And what they were doing was putting trail cameras, spreading them out systematically across the landscape on trails, on travel patterns of deer. In other words, they were trying to have an unbiased look at deer movements. If you put a camera on a scrape, that's biased because what's coming to a scrape mostly?
Bucks, yeah.
Bucks, right. So that's it's not showing you a cross-section of the population. And you don't want to use feed and food sources and things like that. So they were putting them on trails simply to try to literally measure deer demographics. And what Michael found was that the vast majority, first of all the buck pictures he got like 60% of all of his buck pictures in 1 month of the year, and that was November. So clearly buck movement, as we've always known, peaks during the peak of breeding. Then he went and got local breeding data on that deer population, which they had collected, looking at peak breeding dates, and guess what? It corresponded perfectly. The number of adult buck pictures on his trail camera were in perfect alignment with breeding dates, which just makes sense that when does are in estrus, the bucks are going to be moving to find them. And so what he said out of that was, you don't need any biological data locally. If you run your trail cameras on, enough cameras out there in areas where you are monitoring buck movement, when you see a spike in buck movement, you can assume that's a spike in does coming into estrus. That's when your breeding's happening. So based on what he found in Georgia, Tyler, I'd say the answer is yes.
Yeah. Or
what you're seeing there, the peak of buck movement you're seeing is indicating to you when the peak of breeding is. Now, if you were putting those cameras on scrapes, that's different because we know that scrape activity tends to happen a little bit ahead of peak breeding.
Right.
That's more of a let's that's more of a Tinder for deer. You know, they're meeting each other. Who are you? Who are, you know?
Did you just reference Tinder, the dating app?
That's good.
Yes, so good. You
My
know,
man, Lindsay.
they're going to the scrape and swiping left or swiping
That's
right.
right.
You know?
That's right.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, you know, they haven't done the hookup yet. That's
Right.
coming.
Yeah.
But the scrape activity and rub activity especially tends to peak a little bit early. So if your cameras are on that, that's not necessarily going to show you a peak of breeding. If you've got cameras that are on trails, though, just looking at general deer movements, and you start seeing more bucks showing up, you can assume, okay, the breeding is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So something I've noticed here in East Texas, and you probably know a little bit something about the regulation stuff, but over the past 15 years, our area of Texas has really changed a lot when it comes to hunting regulations. And I'm not going to say it's perfect, but I think it is for the better in most senses, to where we went from being a one buck, no doe harvest at all area to now there's a decent number of does being harvested, and we have an antler restriction, which is a little controversial, but we have at least seen an uptick of mature deer being taken. And with that, I think there's going to be probably a more balanced age structure and a more balanced buck-to-doe ratio with the doe harvest. Now, all that being said, it seemed to me over my 15 years of hunting or so in this area of Texas that there used to be a very expanded, wide bell curve of a rut and rut activity, to where you'd have bucks chasing in October and you'd still see some pretty good action in late December, and there never was a big spike. But now it seems that that is starting to condense some. That's just my general observation. Do you feel like that my observation is something that could be possible, or do you think it's just one of those things where I'm just deceived by what I see?
It's absolutely possible.
Okay.
And that's a known thing, that when you tighten up the buck to doe ratio, what happens is, that if a doe comes into estrus and she does not get bred, she's going to cycle again 20 something to 30 days later. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then she'll do it a third time if she has to try to get bred.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, when you've got a buck to doe ratio that's 2 or maybe 3 to 1 bucks does to bucks, then not all of your does are going to be bred on that first estrus cycle. The bucks just can't get around all of them. There's not enough to do that. And so a lot more does are coming in a second time and sometimes even a third time. And that's not good. It's not good for the population, because then you're ending up with more fawns being late born. And those fawns are getting a late start the following year. They are going to be smaller in body size at the outset and generally smaller in antler size throughout their life. So that's not a good thing. So tightening up your sex ratio, when you move toward a 1-to-1 buck to doe ratio, and it's never going to be perfect, but the closer you get to balance, the fewer does that will not be bred, if any, on their first estrus cycle. And that's just naturally going to tighten up the rut. Your breeding, but also your breeding competition is going to be more intense. With more bucks out there to compete against, for breeding rights, you get more fighting, you get more chasing, you get more scrape and rub activity. Things like rattling and grunting work better. So all of those factors are benefits of tightening up that buck to doe ratio. But yeah, you're right. You would see a more intensive rut as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I've seen that some, and in recent years, like maybe it took a few years for it to actually kind of balance, which makes sense, but I just feel like, and maybe it's just because I'm more of an observer than I used to be. I don't know, but with that, how long in a doe's estrus cycle is she actually receptive? Is it a 10-day window, a 3-day window, or what is that there?
Let me know when you find the answer to that.
Dude, I don't mean to stump you all the time. I'm sorry.
I forget. Well, I don't like to quote stats when I'm really not sure.
Sure.
It's a very short
Yeah.
time.
I
It's
applaud
not
you for
days.
that. Most people like me just make stuff up, so that's good.
Yeah.
Well,
it's not days.
Yeah.
It may be a day to 2 days or something like that. I'm speculating here. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. I'd need to go to a biologist and ask that question. And there's not one on this call. So, well, I don't know. Grossman. I just realized Brian Grossman is sitting here next to me driving. Dang it. When a doe comes into estrus, how long, if she's not bred, how long before she goes out of estrus again?
I've always heard 24 to 48 hours.
He's saying 24 to 48 hours.
Gotcha. So the old adage, especially in southern deer hunters, is, man, it's cold, the rut's going to be going on, right? So that just cannot be the case. If she's only there for 24 to 48 hours, the cold weather, cold fronts might increase some deer movement, but you're not actually going to have any estrus cycles that are by no means triggered by that weather, or have, like, if there was a 10-day window and the cold front happened within that 10-day window of that doe being able to be bred, then I would understand it. But since it's such a short time period, pretty much cold fronts have nothing to do with when a doe's going to get bred.
Absolutely nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
That it's, again, it goes back to, why do deer breed when they breed? It's all about fawn survival. That's got nothing to do with weather fluctuations in the fall. So it is triggered by day length to assure that it happens along the same time period every year. And we know in any given location, yes, Alabama has some weird dates. It's different in different locations, but in a given place, every year it's going to be about the same time. And yeah, if a doe is going to come into estrus on November 10th, I don't care if it's a heat wave. She's still coming into estrus. And you know what? Bucks are still going to be chasing her and trying to breed her. I don't care what the weather's doing. I don't care if it's 30-mile-an-hour winds for a week.
Gotcha.
When she's in estrus, it's happening, and they're going to do it. And that's why, I hear a lot of hunters say, oh, man, we didn't have a rut this year. Or, man, the rut, trickled out and spread out over all this time, whatever. No, it happened the same time. You might think you didn't observe much rut activity, but guess what? The deer they took care of business. They got it done.
There's still fawns the next year. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So I kind of want to go back real quick just to make a point and kind of emphasize this for the listener that might be thinking about making a trip south to hunt right now. And we were talking about the trail camera data being something that you can refer to know when the peak estrus days are. But the way I'm understanding what you're saying is that you could also, as a traveling out-of-state hunter, look up biological studies that show when the actual peak breeding dates are and assume that that's also the heaviest rut action overall and plan a trip that way, right?
Yes, correct. And you can even, if you hunt one place 1 year and suspect that you're witnessing a lot of rut activity, guess what? The same date next year is probably going to be the time to be there. So, again, going back to what I said about them being consistent year to year in a given location, the breeding dates pretty much don't change. But yeah, most states do collect that data. They may or may not make it easily available on their website. A lot do, as I've said, but at least give it a shot. Get on the phone and call a biologist with that state agency. That's what they're there for, and ask. And if maybe they don't have the data available, but a WMA manager or a regional biologist is probably going to have a good sense for when the rut occurs on the areas that they're responsible for. Call them up, talk to them. If the agency does not have a map on their website for you. But yes, you definitely can plan on that. And if you go on the hunt and see a bunch of rut activity, again, next year, same time, same date.
Gotcha. So Casey kind of, I think, posed this question to me earlier before we got on the phone, and so I'm going to jack it here.
It probably didn't make any sense. He's probably going to do a better job than me.
Hopefully this one won't stump you. So there are some early ruts, October obviously being, fairly early, but I mean, you've got, in some areas and states, you've got August and September as being pretty heavy rut action, like Florida. Can you expect to go on a hunt during that time period for deer that are rutting and that they would be acting like deer do in November, and you hunt them similarly?
Yes.
So,
and many of the states, Florida has some customized hunting seasons for those areas to help hunters hunt. And yeah, so there's people out hunting in summer in Florida. Just like I said, Alabama adjusting their dates backwards to help hunters hunt into the early February to be able to hunt the rut.
mm-hmm.
And yes, if you went down to, the Everglades of Florida in July and there's a doe in estrus, a buck and a doe are going to be behaving just like a buck and a doe would in November in Iowa.
Uh-huh.
He's going to be chasing. He's going to be fighting other bucks that are trying to breed her. It's the same behaviors. Now, it's going to be 105 degrees, and you're going to be wearing your Speedo and cranking your thermocell.
Not for Tinder purposes, right?
No selfies during that time.
That's right. No stand selfies.
And chugging ice water. But yes, bucks will be chasing does.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's when Hank goes and hunts.
Yeah. So I mean, rattling, grunting, that kind of thing works. Hunting over scrapes, possibly, those kind of things can work for you in August or in February alike.
Correct. Now, what I think is also going on here that you'll see coming into play, like we talked about, and I believe this goes on in southeast Georgia on my family's land. The further south you get, the less it matters from a survival standpoint when deer breed.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, like I said, down in Central America, there's no hard winter weather. And so a fawn that's born at an odd time is not going to die. And what that means is those genetics persist, and in general, the breeding spreads out wider across the calendar. There are more does coming in early and more does coming in late, even though there's still somewhat of a peak. And I think we see that in southeast Georgia, where, yes, the peak of bucks showing up on camera, for example, and the peak of rut activity and breeding is late October, the first week of November. But I have personally pulled fetuses out of late season doe harvest and measured them and found September breeding dates. So there's some does that are starting early in September, and there are also some does that are coming in late at the farm in December. I was actually down at the farm just after Christmas on the 27th, I believe it was, that I saw this, and the morning of the 27th, and saw a doe come through chased by 3 bucks. They were all young bucks. And I think that the doe, she was so small that what I suspect is that she was a fawn that had come in estrus. So that could be what we were talking about earlier, where a fawn comes in for her first estrus late, if she comes in at all. But still, I think that in South Georgia, the breeding dates spread out wider across the calendar. And I would suspect that's also true in South Florida. Because, again, you don't get this survival pressure extinguishing genetics of does that breed late or breed early. So if that's going on, then what that probably means is fewer does coming into estrus during the peak, which might mean that breeding activity, chasing, fighting, rattling, grunting, all of that is maybe less intense than you might think it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's not going to be like in the Midwest and the Northeast, where that peak window is very narrow and you really get that intense rut activity over a short period of time.
Mm-hmm. So earlier you were talking about, the reintroduction of whitetails and that having a big effect locally, or localized effect, let me say it that way, of, rut dates because of the does. Do you feel like there are other pockets like that out there that have not been discovered, or whatever you want to say? Like, for instance, here in East Texas, there were some restocking efforts in the 70s and 80s. Do you feel like there's also a possibility that we have those kind of pockets in certain counties that just have not been identified yet?
Maybe on a micro scale like that, it's possible, but I think that at this point, most of the state agencies and researchers have documented a lot of that and found it. Several years back, when Jason Sumner did his work, he also based that off other studies, and there were some studies done by Dwayne Diefenbach up in Pennsylvania, and some in Florida, looking at all of the biological data they could gather around the nation, anywhere it had ever been gathered by agencies, and mapping that out and seeing what they found.
Mm-hmm.
And so both at the national level, but also at the state level by state agency biologists, they've been looking at this for some time. And I would say it's probably unlikely there's a pocket of hunters seeing a rut that differs wildly from other areas around them that a scientist or biologist is unaware of.
Gotcha. Are there any other odd ruts out there that we haven't hit on?
No, I think we've covered it. I mean, Alabama and Florida to me stick out as being two examples where it really is, Alabama's just kind of this swirl of dates that don't seem to make much sense. And Florida, it seems to make a little more sense in that it changes north to south. As you go from the Panhandle down toward the Keys, it goes from, late to early. But it is just, those two states, man, it's just all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Alabama hunters that I know talk about hunting in October when their, bow season comes in and seeing spotted fawns walking around. And that's just normal. That's normal in Alabama. So it's, those are probably the two oddest examples that I know of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. So, Lindsay, let's have a scenario here, all right? The QDMA.
He's scared.
No, he's like, Casey and his dumb questions. The QDMA for the 2020 year says, Lindsay, for the last quarter, your whole job is to hunt October, November, December, and follow the rut. All right, that's what you get to do, and we're going to pay.
January.
We're going to pay you double, and January. All right, and so your job is going to be to hit the rut in as many places as you can. Now, let's just say per month. You want to hit an October rut, and then pick your Midwest state for your standard rut, and then a December and a January. What is that hunting calendar going to look for you? Where are you going?
Well, we'd start off in coastal Georgia, the land that I know, in October.
Mm-hmm.
I might even try to get on some of those WMAs or wildlife refuges on the Georgia coast. We've got a lot of those on the islands where it's an early, mid to late October rut. Come inland onto the mainland for late October, and then just gradually move my way up into the Piedmont as November comes on. And I mean, it almost is kind of an arc where you go up into middle Georgia, and then I could cross the state line into Alabama in January and hunt my way down toward that southwest corner where it's February. So, I mean, is that answering your question?
Yeah, I think so. So you're not gonna jump around too much. You're just gonna start in southeast Georgia and just kind of make a razoo up north and come back down, right?
Use the residency.
That's right. I don't have to travel very far to hunt multiple months of the calendar.
Yeah,
I think it would be, I'd find it fun to go down to Florida one day and try to get in on some of that August, September rut hunting just for the heck of it, to say I'd done it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm from southeast Georgia. I'm used to mosquitoes and warm weather. That's fine. I can handle that. So no problem there. Just say I'd done it. And then I think it'd be fun to work my way over to Alabama and say that I'd watched, bucks chase does in February. For us here in the Southeast, we don't have to go far to see those kind of extremes. Most of the country, once you get, north of Tennessee and in the middle of the country and north of that, most of the country is all in November with very little variation. So, yeah, for that question, just pick your favorite state and go hunt it in November.
Gotcha. Well, we appreciate your time, Lindsay. I can't thank you enough for being flexible. I know you guys got a busy week headed to ATA. I know last year, you guys at the QDMA were pretty much the only people we felt comfortable hanging around. And so hopefully we weren't like a fifth wheel or a burden or anything doing that. But
I hate to think what that says about y'all.
we are not Tinder type of guys. You know what I mean? But we appreciate your friendship, man, and your knowledge. What's the best way for people to discover all the information you guys have compiled at the QDMA?
just QDMA.com. Come check us out. There's a ton of information there that we make available free to all deer hunters. That's our mission, is education. But do check out, what we do, the mission side of what QDMA does, whether it's, recruiting adult hunters through our Field to Fork program, advocating for wise policy and legislation for deer, whether it's, managing CWD, and, fighting for things like Sunday hunting in Pennsylvania, which we worked on pretty hard and which did pass. So we're an advocate for deer and deer hunters. It's not just all about learning the science of it, though, that's the fun part for us. Mm-hmm. So take a look at it and remember that we're a nonprofit organization and that we work off of our members' support. It makes it possible for us to do what we do, and consider joining. We'd appreciate it, appreciate the support, but you certainly will learn a lot from us along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I know that's for sure, man. I've learned a ton from you through the years, and I'm sorry for some really stupid questions I asked today. I'm sure I didn't formulate them well, but I do really respect everything that you have to say and just how you carry yourself, man. That's something that I've learned a lot about the QDMA over the past few years, is that there are some high-quality individuals over at the Quality Deer Management Association, and I can't tell you how much we value y'all's knowledge and friendship, man.
Well, hey, right back at y'all. We enjoyed getting to know you guys, and hanging out last year at ATA was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed that. I'm sorry y'all won't be here this year, and we'll miss that. But no, we have a lot of fun with you guys. Y'all have come to know us just as deer hunters and deer geeks like any others, and it's been a good time getting to know you.
Well, we appreciate your time, Lindsay, and we'll send people. There's a link below, so we're going to send people to the QDMA and let them look around and find out more about you guys. So y'all be safe heading to ATA.
Thank you, Tyler. Good to talk to you. Take care, Casey.
All right, see you, brother.
See you.
Man, you can always rely on Lindsay for some good laughs, you know what I mean?
Dude, we laugh a lot whenever we're on the podcast, or really anytime we're with the QDMA guys. They just have got a really quality group of folks over there who just love life, like some good old Southern football, and like to talk about deer.
That's right, man. That's who I hang out with usually, man. So glad we could get some information from him. I don't know. Like, to me, I see a lot of opportunity, man, for late season stuff. And we used to have. So the Jones side of my family settled from North Carolina. They settled in Arkansas, the Hope area, and we used to have property there that's been in the family since they settled. The family, my family had originally donated like a little corner section near the road, this county road and farm to market, for cemetery. They donated it to the church that was there. And in Patmos, which is a little bitty town that really doesn't exist anymore, I think, there in Arkansas. And so, like, there are headstones in that cemetery that are, like, from the 1870s and stuff. There are some that are just rocks.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing on them.
That's cool.
And so that was land that was donated. Unfortunately, when my dad's uncle died, my dad has one sibling, and then my dad's uncle had two kids, so the four of them is who the property went to, and nobody wanted to keep it but my dad, and my dad couldn't afford to buy everybody out, and so we had to sell the property, and my dad was really upset about it.
Yeah.
Really, really crushed about it.
You told me a story about a white oak tree on that property.
Oh, man. Yeah, the property's awesome, man. Like, there was never hardly that many deer on it. But I guess the reason I'm telling the story real quick before I go into that is because there's a February season in Arkansas. It goes into like late February for archery. And so we always wanted to hunt up there late, and we never really did hunt that late up there. But in October, there was like where we had a little mobile home set up there. And you was on top of this hill in a cattle pasture, and you just look down, and the hill drops off real steep. There's a pond and like a bunch of pines down there on the backside of the pond, and there's some white oaks on the property as well, like legit ones. And there was one big white oak on the edge of this field down the hill, and the deer would always hang around it. In October, the only deer I ever saw killed off of it was my dad's buddy Dan, who he played football with in college. was hunting that white oak, he just set up a tree stand there, and he's not really a deer hunter, you know, and he killed a small buck there under that white oak tree coming to eat acorns, and I always wanted to shoot a deer there, and I actually never shot a deer on that property. So I know, but you know, it was not great deer hunting. So driving 2 hours to go hunt out of state and pay the $400 to get the tag or whatever it is, it's pretty expensive in Arkansas. So just never really kind of had the time or money to do that. So yeah. Anyway, with that being said as well, like February, January, late season is something I've always wanted to do. I just never have really done it that much. Hunted January a little bit in Oklahoma back in the day, and I'm hoping that we can get us another hunt in this year, next year in January, February, because it'd be fun, man, because it is kind of a dead time. Like, there's not a ton of great fishing, like we were talking about earlier. There's not a ton of great fishing going on right now. There's a chance to catch a real big fish for sure, but like, you could go out and pitch a jig all day and not catch anything. So, it's kind of a dead period. My dad likes to say it's the time of year you play tackle box. Where you just like you just get in your boat and you look at your tackle box and all your baits and everything. Yeah. You're like I can't wait to catch one on that right there. And then you put it back in its tray and you get another one out.
It's the same equivalent as like people getting their bows out in August and shooting a lot. You know, like I can't wait. You know?
yeah. So anyway, I'm excited about the newfound knowledge that I had talking to Lindsay. Man, there's some cool stuff. And really one of the biggest answers for me that helps me in planning trips and stuff is, being able to look at peak breeding dates as being also correlated with peak movement, like buck movement, so that helps you when you're planning out a state trip big time, I think, when you're looking at ruts and stuff. And I mean, obviously, if you're just a guy that does a rutcation or whatever in November in the Midwest, you can do the same thing there with knowing that, peak conception dates are, around November 14th or whatever. So be there, right before and right after maybe.
Yeah.
So anyway, lots of cool things. I like podcasts where we talk kind of biological type of stuff about deer, because that really helps us to know the quarry better and make better decisions when we're out in the woods, I think. So now, who knows what's going to happen in the next couple weeks? We may do some fishing podcasts. So if you're, I noticed this. We released that duck hunting video, and we don't have many duck hunters. I don't think that listen to this podcast, because I did release it at a bad time, I think, during the holidays. But there's not a lot of people that viewed that as opposed to like some of the deer videos we've been releasing. So
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe they won't like the fishing, but I do know there's been a few people talking about this and that. I think we had a guy talk about how much he liked our fly fishing videos and stuff. So it's just what we do, man. And hopefully we'll be able to get out and catch some fish this year. I ate some. I kind of have vowed to eat more bass. I'm not sure about overs, but this year I'm definitely gonna be cooking some bass up, man.
Well, I'll tell you what's cool is around mid-April, early April, you can go out with a jigging pole and a jig and eat whatever you catch.
Oh yeah,
bass, catfish, and crappie. Like there's days when
big bluegill.
I've never caught a big bluegill that time of year, but I'll eat one. Don't get me wrong. But there's days where, like, you'll catch 3 crappie, 1 bass, and 1 catfish, and that's kind of your ratios, And that's talking about a good mixed bag.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Dude, we had one day, was it in May last year or June, where we caught all those bluegills off the bed? We didn't do a very good job of videoing it.
Mm-hmm. That was fun.
Dude, that was awesome, man.
I think that we were a couple weeks late on that, too.
Yeah.
I think if we were in there a little bit earlier, we could have really ripped some toads.
Yeah. We caught some nice ones, like some that you gut and throw in the fryer.
What I've learned about bluegills is that when you get out on the main lake, that's where you find the big daddies. I don't know if it's something to do with the just water temps or shells or what, but out there in the bigger part of the lake, that's where you get them. Man, I can remember, I've probably told this story in the podcast before, we used to go out there and catch, we call them brim, but they're not brim. Catch bluegills. And then throw them at stumps to catch bass. And one time my buddy reeled in a bass that had eaten the bluegill he threw out, and he didn't have a hook in the bass. The bluegill was so big it wedged in the bass's mouth.
They couldn't get it out? Really?
He got the bass couldn't get it out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dude, that's crazy.
Reeled it in. I was there to witness this.
I had
It
a similar
happened.
thing happen at the lodge there one time, and that's Main Lake. But there's sometimes if you find it right, you'll find a bed of just female bluegills on this bed or whatever, and you're just catching 0.4 and half pounders on every cast, 8-9 inchers, and I would take my 4-weight when I had that little cheap one, and which I've never had an expensive one, so whatever. But yeah, I had one of my first ones, and I was catching them, man, good, and I get one, and they're a pretty good little fight, and I'm not just gonna rip them in. I'm gonna let them play for a second, because it's fun. And all of a sudden, this fish gets real heavy, and I'm like, "What in the world is going on?" And so it starts taking line. I'm just it's going, man. And it goes out there probably 15 yards, maybe 20 yards, until it finally kind of relaxes. And I'm like, "What in the world?" I knew that a bass or something, I had hooked or something. And so it just relaxes all of a sudden. I'm like, "Oh man!" So I start stripping it in, and I strip it in real fast. And I'm not feeling anything, and it gets close, and it's a bluegill that's shredded, it's still all intact. It's just scraped down both sides, yeah, pretty much. And right behind it is a 6-pounder.
Oh,
and I'm like, oh, and I saw I set it down real quick, and I was like, please come back. It never did, and I didn't get a hook in it because I was fishing with a bead head or whatever. So. Anyway, there's been some cool things that happened at the lodge over the years, man.
Yeah.
There's just something about when you live at a lake, weird things are going to happen.
Oh,
man.
yeah, man.
Yeah,
when you spend some time on the edge of the water. Not out in the middle of the water. Things happen out there, but where land meets water, man, there's some crazy stuff that goes on.
That's right, man. Snakes and all kinds of stuff. Alligators, yep. This guy, what's he doing? Anyway.
Scared me. I turned around and said,
he's probably trying to give us a package.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, I guess that's about time to wrap it up then. Appreciate you guys listening. Don't forget to subscribe to YouTube. Check out the Iowa stuff. And remember, this is your element.
Living it.
Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some meat eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls. I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like them. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.